Alright, this is the Radio Shack TRS-80 64K Color Computer 2. Could the name be any longer? In the late 70s, early 80s, these personal computers, these small home computers started to become popular. And Radio Shack was, of course, one of the first major stores to really start selling them. And they sold a lot of their own computers under the name Tandy. So Tandy was like a Radio Shack brand. Some of these are labeled as Tandy TRS-80s, and some of them, like this one, is just labeled as the Radio Shack model. I don't know if that's maybe because this is a Canadian model and maybe the US ones would say Tandy, or if it's just something to do with the date it was built that they changed the names. But either way, the Radio Shack and the Tandy computers, these color computers and TRS-80s, they're all the same, just some of them say Tandy, some of them say Radio Shack. The TRS-80 was a personal computer in the late 70s. It was only black and white. It was very simple. But then in 1980 they came out with the color computer. Now, the color computer is a completely different machine than the TRS-80, despite this one saying TRS-80 on it. This actually has nothing in common with the original TRS-80s. Completely different architecture and processors and everything. The color computer in 1980 was powered by a Motorola 6809E. That's an 8-bit processor. Ran at just under 1 megahertz. And that might sound pretty pathetic, but actually in 1980 it was considered a pretty powerful processor. This had a more powerful processor than the VIC-20 and the Atari 8-bit computers, but they were more geared for gaming, and they had a better graphics processor, they had better sound processors. This one has, a very, very basic single channel sound chip, very basic, just basically a beep here and a beep there. Graphics-wise, also very simple. It has 9 colors total, and its graphics mode at its lowest resolution, which I believe is 32 by 64 resolution, it can do 8 colors on the screen. So still not as advanced graphically as the Atari 8-bit computers. Now, like I said, this is the Color Computer 2, and basically, once again, just think of that as your PS2 Slim of the original Color Computer. So, this one came out in 1983, and it's basically just a smaller redesign, with a better keyboard on it, and more memory options. These ones came with either 16, 32, or 64K, and like I mentioned, this one in particular has 64K of memory on it. So this was the most amount of memory that you could get on the Color Computer 2. If you guys are in the UK, you may have seen this computer under a different name. There was actually a clone of the Color Computer, and over in the UK it was called the Dragon 32 or the Dragon 64, and those are basically just clones of the Color Computer. This is actually a very well-built machine. It's fairly heavy. You can see in the bottom here. Got a lot of stickers underneath here. Radio Shack part numbers. Well, that kind of stuff you would expect. You can see all the metal shielding in there. Got some nice rubber feet on the bottom of it. It's got an internal power supply, so there's no big power brick for it. Just has a standard power cord hardwired right into it. It's got the toggle switch for the power here, or toggle button for the power. Push it in to turn it on. You've got 6-pin DIN controller ports, so unfortunately they're not the D-sub 9-pin, Atari, Commodore, Sega style controller ports, so I don't actually have any controller ports for it because of that. But there's 2 controller ports on the back. Got, of course, a serial port for different peripherals made available for it. Now, there's no floppy drive controller in this, but there was a floppy drive available for it. Not very common. Most commonly, of course, you would have games on cassette. So this is the port here for the cassette drive. Strictly RF out on this thing, so we got the RF plug and the channel 3, channel 4 selector switch, and then a reset button. And that's it on the back. On the right side there is a cartridge slot. It is spring-loaded with a plastic flap. And as I mentioned, you could get a floppy drive for it, but there was no floppy drive controller built in. So they actually made a cartridge that would go in the cartridge slot here, and that had the floppy drive controller, and then the floppy drive would hook up to that. But like I said, it wasn't very popular. Most of the games you were either going to get on cassette or on cartridge. Anyways, that's the computer itself, and let's take a look at some games for it. Okay, so if we turn it on without any cassette in it, or any cartridge in it, sorry, you see, very similar to all the other computers in the 80s, you have a built-in basic operating system that's built into the ROM. And there you go, with a beautiful green screen. One thing I do have to say about this, it's got a very clean RF signal. That's, you know, not too much noise in that signal, so that's cool. And we'll turn that off. Like I mentioned earlier in the pickups video, if you watched that, I did pick up 2 games for this thing. It's the first time I've actually ever seen color computer games, so I grabbed them. But I noticed a problem. Now, as I mentioned in the Color Computer 3, they actually changed some stuff, so not all the stuff's backwards compatible. And as we can see here, requires a Color Computer 3 with 128K of memory. Son of a bitch. I can't play this game. Of course, the cartridges are identical, because a lot of the older games work on the Color Computer 3. But this one, obviously, does not work on the Color Computer 2. It doesn't have a fast enough processor, doesn't have enough memory, doesn't have 128K of memory. So it does fit in there, and it sort of works, you just get a bunch of gibberish when you turn it on. So I've actually only got one working game for it, and as you can see on here, it just says Radio Shack TRS-80 Color Computer. So I'm guessing this game is simple enough to work on any of them. There's no memory requirements on it. Plug that in there. Just like so. And turn it on. And unfortunately... and there's your very simple music and annoying sound effects. Like I said, very simple sound processor in here. Not on much like an Atari 2600. You're not going to get the cool music that you get on the Commodore 64 here. And, well, there you go. Very simple game. Looks like maybe a, I don't know, I'm not going to say a Pac-Man clone. Very big maze with a kind of zoomed in mode. Kind of a neat effect there. Unfortunately, I have no controllers, so I can't play the game. I can't even play the one single game I have for it. But it's pretty cool nonetheless. Copyright 1982, so you can see its age there. Of course, as the games on these home computers got more popular in the mid-80s, and the Commodore 64 and the Atari 8-bits really started to kind of break away from this thing in terms of popularity for game developers. So there's a lot of games on here that aren't the official game, but it has sort of Pac-Man clones or, you know, Donkey Kong clones. There's a lot of clone games on here, whereas the official developers and official publishers weren't releasing games on here. But Tandy was getting their hands on a lot of clone games. Still has a little bit of a following today. There's still color computer websites out there where you can download games and put them on cassette, you know, record them to cassette and use your cassette deck if you have the cassette deck for it. And there's, you know, actually on the Color Computer 3, there's an arcade perfect port of Donkey Kong available. So fairly popular still today with the hobbyists, and not a bad machine for its time.